you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes. Imagine the smell of a city that has never slept. Wood smoke and river water and baking bread and the particular organic richness of 1,000,000 human beings living in close proximity without modern sanitation. The smell of empire. The smell of the world's center. Imagine the sound. Not silence. Rome at midnight was never silent. The rumble of iron-wheeled carts on stone streets, the sound that daytime ordinances prohibited and that therefore owned the night completely, the distant sound of music from a tavern still open, the barking of a dog in a courtyard somewhere above you, the water, always the water, the aqueducts feeding the fountains that never stopped running, their sound the continuous background note of Roman urban life. Imagine the light, not the blazing daylight of a Mediterranean city under the summer sun, the broken, warm, uneven light of oil lamps in windows, of torches at doorways, of fires visible through open shutters 3 stories above the street. Enough light to see by barely, enough darkness to hide in easily. This is Rome at midnight, not the Rome of the forum speeches and the Senate debates and the triumphal processions. The Rome that existed when all of that was finished for the day. The Rome of the ordinary and the extraordinary, the legal and the illegal, the sacred and the profane, all of it happening simultaneously in a city too large and too alive to fully rest. We are going to walk through it, all of it, taking our time. The city we are entering is Rome at the height of the empire. Let us place ourselves in the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era, the period of Rome's greatest extent and greatest prosperity, when the population of the city approached or perhaps exceeded 1,000,000 people. 1,000,000 people in an ancient city. The scale requires a moment of genuine contemplation. The largest cities in the contemporary world outside Rome were considerably smaller. Alexandria, perhaps 500,000. Antioch, perhaps 250,000. The great cities of China, which Rome barely knew existed, comparable perhaps. But in the Mediterranean world, in the world that Rome knew and ruled, nothing approached what Rome had become. 1,000,000 people required feeding every day. Rome could not feed itself. The grain that sustained the city came from Egypt and North Africa, transported by ship across the Mediterranean in quantities that made ancient maritime commerce look less like a luxury trade and more like an essential infrastructure. 1,000,000 people required housing. The solution Rome developed was the insula, the apartment building, multiple stories of rented accommodation stacked above ground floor commercial spaces. The insulae of Rome rose to heights that ancient building regulations tried to limit, and that the building's owners routinely exceeded. 6 stories, 7 stories, 8 stories of people living in stacked proximity, sharing staircases, sharing the street-level fountains that provided their water, sharing the noise and the smell and the life of urban density at its most extreme. 1,000,000 people required organizing. The administrative machinery of Rome was extraordinary in its ambition and imperfect in its execution, which is the description of all administrative machinery in all periods. The city was divided into regions and neighborhoods and blocks, each with its own local administration, its own religious observances, its own social hierarchies. 1 million people, organized and fed and housed and administered, constituted the city we are about to walk through. It is midnight. The city is not sleeping. Let us begin. Start at the river. The Tiber runs through Rome from north to south, dividing the main city from the Trastevere district on its western bank. At midnight, the river has a quality that it does not possess during the day, when its banks are crowded with the commerce that makes it one of Rome's essential arteries. At midnight, the Tiber is dark, not entirely dark. The lights of the city reflect in it, broken and multiplied by the current's movement, orange and amber points of light stretching and contracting as the water moves. The bridges crossing it are visible as darker shapes against the slightly less dark sky, their stone arches holding the weight of centuries above the moving water. The smell of the river at midnight is the smell of the Tiber in any hour, but concentrated by the cooler night air. The river carries everything the city releases into it. The effluent of 1 million people, the runoff from the streets after rain, the waste from the tanneries and the dye shops that cluster at the river's edges, because water is essential to their processes, and the river is the largest available source. It is not a clean river. It has never been a clean river by the standards of any period that has given the matter serious thought. But it is the river of Rome, and Rome has organized its entire existence around it in ways that make the river's character inseparable from the city's character. A barge is moving on the river, slowly, silently from this distance, pushed by poles against the current. The bargemen work at night because the daytime river is too crowded for efficient movement. They are moving cargo, grain perhaps, or building materials, or the amphorae of wine and oil that are the fundamental commodity of Roman commerce. They do not speak. Their work is physical and rhythmic and does not require conversation, and the night river rewards quiet with a kind of peace that the daytime river never offers. Watch them for a moment as they move upstream. The barge disappears around a bend in the river, its lantern visible until the bend takes it from sight. The river continues its sound. The city begins behind you. Step away from the river and into the city proper. The street you are on is one of the narrower secondary streets that web between the major roads of Rome. It is perhaps 3 meters wide, which is wider than many streets in the dense residential districts, but considerably narrower than the major thoroughfares. The paving stones beneath your feet are the same stones that have been here for decades, worn smooth by the feet of millions of people passing over them. The smoothness is deceptive in the dark. What appears level is not always level. The stones settle unevenly over time, creating small rises and depressions that a daytime walker navigates automatically, and that a nighttime walker discovers with their feet. On either side of the street, the buildings rise. The ground floors are commercial spaces, their wooden shutters closed and barred for the night. Behind those shutters are the workshops of craftsmen, the stalls of food vendors, the counters of small merchants. Everything closed, everything waiting for the morning. Above the commercial ground floors, the insulae rise. 2 stories, 3 stories, 4. In the upper windows, some light is visible. The lamp burning in someone's room because they cannot sleep, or because they are working, or because they are afraid of the complete dark. The lamps of ancient Rome were clay dishes containing olive oil, with a wick of plant fiber. They burned with a small, warm, orange flame that provided sufficient light for reading or for close work, but did not illuminate a room the way modern lighting does. They also produced smoke. The upper floors of Roman apartment buildings were permanently marked by lamp smoke on their ceilings and walls. They also posed a fire risk that was not theoretical. Rome burned, not metaphorically, literally, regularly, with a frequency that made fire one of the defining features of Roman urban life. The insulae, built of wood above their ground floor masonry, densely packed together with narrow streets between them that could carry fire from building to building with devastating speed, were structures waiting for the spark. The Great Fire of 64 CE, the one associated with Nero and the legend of a burning emperor playing music, burned for 6 days and destroyed or damaged 10 of Rome's 14 administrative regions. It was not the only great fire. It was not even the worst. It was simply the most famous because of the emperor associated with it and because of the quality of the sources that recorded it. Walking these streets at midnight, this fire risk is a background awareness that every Roman carries the way that residents of earthquake zones carry the awareness of seismic activity. Not paranoia, not denial, simply a fact of their environment that has been incorporated into their understanding of the world they live in. Continue along the street. A cat crosses ahead of you, pausing briefly to assess your relevance to its evening, deciding you have none, and continuing into a doorway that apparently provides access to wherever it is going. Cats were not pets in ancient Rome in the modern sense. They were working animals, present in the city, because cities that store grain attract rodents, and rodents attract the animals that eat them. They were also simply present, the way urban animals are present in any city, adapting their lives to the human environment with the pragmatic competence that makes cats one of the most successful companion species in human history. The cat is gone. The street continues ahead. You hear them before you see them. The sound of iron wheels on stone is one of the defining sounds of Rome at night. During the day, wheeled traffic carrying commercial goods was prohibited in the city center, a regulation established because the daytime streets were too crowded and the noise too disruptive for commerce to occur, with wheels adding to the general chaos. At night, the prohibition lifted and the carts came. The merchants and suppliers who kept Rome fed and supplied needed to move their goods. The grain from the river warehouses needed to reach the neighborhood distributors. The building materials for the perpetual construction and reconstruction of the city needed to reach their sites. The amphorae of wine and oil and fish sauce needed to reach the taverns and the private households that ordered them. All of this movement happened at night, and the sound of it was the sound of iron on stone, multiplied across the city's street network, echoing between the buildings, carrying further in the cooler night air than it would in the day. The cart that appears at the end of the street is large, a heavy vehicle drawn by 2 mules whose breath mists in the night air. The driver sits on the front of the cart with the particular posture of someone who has made this journey many times, who knows the route so well that his conscious attention is elsewhere, while his body manages the familiar movements. The cart carries amphorae, tall small ceramic vessels, each one containing perhaps 25 liters of something. Wine, probably, or olive oil, or the fish sauce called garum that Romans used as a condiment, with a thoroughness that modern Mediterranean cuisines have largely abandoned. The amphorae are stacked and secured with rope. They rattle slightly against each other as the cart moves over the uneven stones. The mules pull the cart past you without interest. The driver does not look up. The cart continues along the street, its iron wheels producing the sound that defines the Roman night, that keeps some residents awake, and that others have learned to sleep through with the accommodation that city dwellers make to the sounds of their cities. The sound fades as the cart turns a corner. Another sound rises in its place. Further away, another cart moving in a different direction. Rome is being supplied in the dark by the people whose work happens when the city's daytime population is not watching. Stop outside one of the apartment buildings. Look up. The building rises above you. 4 stories, its facade presenting to the street a series of windows, some shuttered, some open to the night air. The ground floor is commercial space, closed and dark. Above it, the residential floors, each one slightly different from the others in its arrangement of windows and doors. This particular insula houses perhaps 50 people. Across multiple families, multiple individuals, multiple arrangements of people sharing rooms and sharing space in the way that people of limited means have always arranged themselves in cities where space is expensive. On the ground floor level, behind the shuttered commercial space, there are also rooms. Smaller, darker, cheaper. The least desirable accommodation in the building, at street level where the noise is greatest and the privacy is least. As you move upward through the floors, the quality of the accommodation changes. The middle floors are the most desirable, above the street noise but below the effort of too many stairs. The upper floors, closest to the sky and furthest from the ground, are paradoxically the cheapest, because they are furthest from the street-level fountain that provides water, and because carrying water and everything else up multiple flights of stairs is a labor that moderates the appeal of the view. Inside the building, at this hour, most people are sleeping. The sleeping of the poor in ancient Rome was not the private, individual sleeping of modern people with private bedrooms and personal space. Rooms were shared. Beds were shared. The sleeping was communal in the way that all space was communal when space was expensive and people were numerous. On the 3rd floor, in a room at the back of the building away from the street noise, a family is sleeping. A man and his wife and their 2 children on a wooden bed frame with a mattress of bundled cloth. The room is small enough that the bed occupies most of it. The lamp in the room has been extinguished. The darkness is total, except for the faint suggestion of the city's nighttime light coming through the single window. The children are sleeping with the complete unconsciousness of the very young, their breathing deep and slow. The parents are sleeping more lightly, as parents sleep, aware of the children's presence even in sleep. On the floor below, a man is awake. He is a craftsman, a cobbler, and tomorrow he has more work than he can comfortably complete. He is lying on his sleeping mat in the room he shares with another man, a baker, who is also awake because the baker's hours require him to rise before the 2nd hour of the night. The cobbler and the baker are not talking. They are simply awake in the same room, each managing his own wakefulness in his own way. the darkness between them unremarkable. This is the interior of a Roman insula at midnight, not the dramatic poverty of historical imagination, not the comfortable domesticity of modern projection. Something in between. People managing the conditions of their lives with the competence and the resignation and the occasional grace that managing difficult conditions produces. Above them all, the night sky, visible to anyone who leans out of an upper window and looks up, carries its stars without comment. Walk toward the heart of the city. The Forum Romanum at midnight is a different place from the forum of the daytime orations and legal proceedings and political theater that make it the most famous public space in the ancient world. At midnight, the Forum is empty, not literally empty. The temples that line it have their eternal fires, their lamp flames, their stationed priests maintaining the continuous religious obligations that Roman religion required. The Vestal virgins in their precinct near the Forum maintain the sacred fire of Vesta that must never be extinguished, tending it through the night as they tend it through the day. But the crowds are gone. The advocates and the petitioners and the merchants and the politicians and the philosophers and the tourists and the beggars and the pickpockets who constitute the Forum's daytime population have dispersed into the city's night. What remains is the architecture. And the architecture of the Forum at midnight, seen by whatever light the city's lamps and the sky's stars provide, is extraordinary. The temples rise against the sky. The Temple of Saturn, whose columns will still be standing 2,000 years from now, when tourists photograph them against a Roman sunset. The Temple of Castor and Pollux. The Basilica Julia. The great law court, whose marble floors reflect the night sky in fragmented pieces. The Sacred Way, the Via Sacra, runs through the Forum. It is the oldest road in Rome, the road along which triumphal processions have moved for centuries, along which conquered kings have walked in chains before the Roman crowd, along which the greatest military achievements of the greatest military power in the ancient world have been publicly celebrated. At midnight, it is simply a stone road in the moonlight. A single figure is crossing the Forum. He is moving quickly, with the purposefulness of someone who has a destination and is not lingering to admire the architecture. He is carrying something under his arm, a scroll or a bundle of documents, something flat and significant enough to be carried carefully. He does not look up as he passes. The Forum receives him and releases him and is empty again. Stand in the center of it for a moment. Look at the temples around you. The Senate House at the Forum's edge, closed and dark, its bronze doors shut against the night. The Rostra, the great speaking platform from which the most famous speeches in Roman history were delivered, empty and silent. Julius Caesar's body was burned near here. Mark Antony stood on that platform and addressed the crowd that had gathered for the funeral. The speech that Shakespeare would write 2,000 years later, whether historically accurate or not, catches something true about the power of the place and the moment. These stones were there. These stones are still here. The night is quiet around them. Not everywhere is quiet. Follow the sound of music toward the tavern that is still operating at this hour. The Popina is the Roman equivalent of the tavern, a street-level establishment serving wine and food to the population that requires wine and food at hours when more respectable establishments have closed. Every neighborhood in Rome has one. Many neighborhoods have several. The Popina you are approaching is in a slightly disreputable district, which is to say a district that has a higher concentration of the kinds of establishments that city authorities periodically attempt to regulate, and that immediately reconstitute themselves after any regulatory intervention, because they serve a genuine human need. The light from the Popina spills into the street before the establishment itself comes into view. Warm orange lamplight, multiple lamps burning inside, creating a brightness that is unusual by the standards of the nighttime street. The sound is voices, multiple conversations, and underneath them a musician playing a stringed instrument in the corner of the room. Not performing exactly. Playing. The distinction matters. A performance implies an audience giving attention. This is music as background, music as atmosphere, music as the audible equivalent of the lamplight, simply present to make the space more inhabitable. You enter. The Popina is a single room, low-ceilinged, smoky from the lamps and from the charcoal fire over which food is being kept warm in ceramic vessels. The walls are painted, as walls in Rome are always painted, the paint darkened by years of lamp smoke to a uniformity that partially obscures whatever the original decoration was. The clientele is mixed in the way that late-night establishments in any city are mixed. People who have finished late work, people who could not sleep, people who prefer the company of strangers in a lit room to the darkness of their own accommodation, people conducting business that is better conducted away from the scrutiny of the daytime city. A man and a woman are seated at one of the low tables in deep conversation, their heads close together, their voices below the level of the general noise. They are either discussing something confidential, or they are intimate in a way that the nighttime Popina accommodates without comment. 3 men at another table are playing dice, a game that Roman legislation has periodically attempted to restrict, and that Roman citizens have periodically ignored with complete consistency. The dice game in the Popina is one of the oldest continuous traditions in the city. The proprietor is a woman of perhaps 40, with the particular efficiency of someone who has been running this establishment for a long time and has developed a comprehensive ability to assess the room and respond to whatever it requires without visible effort. She brings wine to a table without being asked, because she knew the table needed wine, before the people at it had consciously registered the lack. The wine is served in ceramic cups, undecorated, functional. It is diluted with water in the standard Roman manner, the ratio of wine to water a matter of social convention and personal preference. Drinking wine undiluted was considered a sign of either barbarianism or of someone who has already had enough diluted wine to abandon convention. The musician in the corner plays on. You take a cup of wine and find a place near the wall. The room around you is the room of people who have, for various reasons, ended up in the same place at the same hour. The reasons are as varied as the people, but the fact of being here, in the light and the warmth and the sound, is a choice they have all made independently and are all sustaining together. There is something in this that is recognizable across 2,000 years. The need for light at the dark hour, the preference for company over solitude at the late hour, the particular quality of the conversation that happens when the day's obligations have been fulfilled, and what remains is simply the desire to be somewhere with other people, drinking something warm, while the night continues outside. The musician plays a phrase that is repeated 3 times with small variations. The conversation in the room continues at its various levels. The dice are thrown. Leave the Papina and walk uphill. Rome is a city of hills. The 7 hills on which the city was traditionally said to be founded, and the additional hills that the city's expansion has incorporated, create a topography that makes walking through Rome a constant negotiation with elevation. The wealthy quarter you are ascending toward sits on higher ground, where the air is better than in the valley districts, and where the distance from the river provides some relief from the Tiber's characteristic contributions to Roman urban air quality. The streets here are wider. The buildings on either side are not insulae, but domus, the single-family houses of the wealthy, their street-facing walls presenting a largely blank face to the public way, their interiors organized around the central atrium and the garden beyond it that constitutes the real heart of a Roman home. The blank street-facing walls are not accidental. They are a deliberate choice. The Roman wealthy house turned its back on the street and faced inward, toward the private spaces that were the true domain of the family. The street belonged to the public. The house belonged to the family. The wall between them was not merely structural, but philosophical. At the doorways of the larger houses, doorkeepers are present, some sleeping, some awake, all technically on duty. The doorkeeper was a social institution as much as a practical one. His presence signaled the household's status and provided a first point of contact for visitors while filtering out those the household preferred not to receive. At this hour, visitors are not expected. The doorkeepers doze in their niches beside the entrance doors. Inside one of the houses, through walls that a nighttime walker cannot see through, a lamp is burning in an upper room. The owner of this house is awake. He is a senator, a man of considerable wealth and considerable political obligation, and his sleep has been disturbed by the considerations that political life generates. His current worry is a vote scheduled for several days hence, a matter of allocation of public funds in which his position conflicts with that of a colleague whose support he needs on a different matter. He is lying on his bed in the dark, conducting the internal argument that political calculation requires, his wife sleeping beside him with the comfortable confidence of someone who has made her peace with the fact that her husband's mind does not stop when his body is horizontal. The senator eventually rises, goes to his writing room, lights a lamp, and begins composing a letter to the colleague whose position conflicts with his own. The letter will be delivered tomorrow morning. The reply will come by midday. The negotiation will be conducted in the language of formal correspondence that Roman political culture has developed to a high art. At midnight, in the lamplight of his writing room, the senator writes the first sentence. He pauses. He considers. He continues. Outside his house, the street is quiet. Above his house, the stars are present. Below his house, the city continues its midnight operations with complete indifference to his political calculations. Not everyone at midnight is engaged in leisure or politics or commerce. Some people are working. The bakers of Rome rise at midnight or before midnight because the bread that Rome requires for breakfast must be ready when the city wakes. The baking is a process that takes time, and time requires starting early, and starting early means that midnight is the hour of the baker's working day, when the first loaves are going into the ovens. The bakery district near the Tiber is alive with activity at this hour. The mills, which in larger bakeries are attached to the bakery itself, are turning. The millstones driven by donkeys walking in slow circles, grinding the grain that was delivered overnight into the flour that will become the bread. The donkeys walk. They have been walking for hours. They will walk for several more hours before they are relieved. The blindfolds they wear to prevent dizziness are a practical accommodation to the circular nature of their work. The donkeys themselves are beyond complaint about the circumstances of their employment. The bakers work by lamplight. Their hands move through the dough with the automatic competence of long practice. The kneading, the shaping, the placement in the oven, the monitoring of the baking, the removal of the finished loaves. Each step repeated hundreds of times across a working night. The oven is fired with wood. The temperature is managed by the baker's experience, by the feel of the heat on the skin of the forearm held near the oven's opening, by the color of the flame visible in the oven's interior, by the smell of the baking bread that changes character as the loaves progress from raw to done. The bread that emerges from these ovens every morning is the fundamental food of Rome's population, not a luxury, not a supplement to a more substantial diet. For a significant portion of Rome's 1 million people, bread is the primary food. The grain distribution program that the Roman state maintained for its citizen population, the annona, provided grain rather than bread, but the grain had to become bread, and the bakers were the mechanism of that transformation. The finished loaves are stacked near the bakery entrance, ready for the distribution that will begin before dawn. The bread sellers who will carry them through the streets, the neighborhood shops that will receive them, are all part of a supply chain that operates with the efficiency of long practice and the urgency of genuine need. A city of 1 million people needs to eat every morning. The bakers are making that possible. Their work is invisible to the people who buy the bread, because the work happens at the hour when those people are sleeping. The bread arrives. This is what the buyers know. Behind the arrival is the midnight labor that produced it. Rome at midnight is not unwatched. The vigiles, the fire watch, and night police of Rome patrol the city's streets in organized units. They are a force of several thousand men organized into cohorts that cover the city's regions, each cohort responsible for a specific geographic area. Their primary responsibility is fire. The constant fire risk of a city built largely of wood, lit by open flames, with narrow streets that carry fire between buildings with terrifying speed, required organized response capability. The vigiles were that capability. They also performed police functions. The streets of Rome at night were not entirely safe, and the vigiles represented the law's presence in the darkness. A patrol is moving along the street ahead of you. 4 men carrying torches, moving with the alert but unhurried pace of people who have several more hours of patrol ahead of them, and are conserving their attention for what actually requires it. Their equipment includes the tools of firefighting, buckets and hooks, and the means of creating fire breaks by pulling down structures in the path of a fire's advance. They notice you. They assess you briefly. You are not doing anything that requires their intervention. They continue past. The torch torchlight they carry moves with them, illuminating a moving circle of street as they walk, the illuminated circle contracting behind them as they move away, the street returning to its nighttime darkness. Watch them until they turn a corner and their torchlight disappears. The vigils are one of the features of Roman urban organization that demonstrate the sophistication of the city's administrative response to the genuine problems of managing a population of 1 million people. Organized firefighting, night policing, the infrastructure of safety that a great city requires, and that requires, in turn, organization and funding and management. It is not perfect. No system managing 1 million people is perfect, but it is real, and it represents a level of organized response to urban challenges that most of the world would not equal for many centuries after Rome's fall. The street is quiet again after the patrol has passed. The city continues. Rome's religious life did not stop at sunset. The temples that punctuated the city's geography, on the hills and in the valleys, in the forum and in the neighborhoods, maintained their continuous religious obligations through the night. The sacred fires burned. The incense rose. The priests who were obligated to be present were present. The temple of Vesta in the forum maintained the sacred fire that Roman theology associated with the eternal flame of Rome itself. The Vestal virgins who tended it lived in the house of the Vestals adjacent to the temple and maintained continuous attendance on the fire through night and day. If the fire went out, it was a religious catastrophe, requiring elaborate purification rituals. The Vestal who allowed it to go out faced severe punishment. The fire, in Roman religious understanding, was not merely symbolic. Its continuity was the continuity of Rome. The fire is burning now as you pass near the forum. You cannot see it directly from the street, but its light is visible above the temple's walls, a warm glow against the darker sky above. The Vestal within, the young woman whose life and honor have been given to the service, is present near the flame, maintaining her watch. Her name is not recorded. The individual names of most of the Vestals are not recorded, absorbed into the institution they served. But she is there, real, awake in the midnight city, tending the fire that Rome believes must never go out. Further across the city, in the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus on the Palatine Hill, priests are conducting the first rituals of the new day, the rituals that begin before dawn to ensure that the gods are properly honored in the transition between night and morning. The Palatine Hill rises above the forum, its temples visible against the sky. The temple of Jupiter at its summit, the most important temple in Rome, the temple to which triumphal processions ascended, where the conquering general made his offering to the god who had granted victory. At this hour, the hill is quiet except for the priests at their ritual preparations. 2,000 years from now, people will climb this hill and look at what remains of these temples and try to imagine what the hill looked like when the temples were intact. They will look at reconstructions and paintings and computer models. You are looking at the actual thing, the actual temples, intact, their columns standing, their roofs complete, their interiors lit by the lamps of the priests going about their ancient business. This is what it looked like, this moment, this view, from this spot, at this hour. Remember it. Walk east toward the great amphitheater. The Colosseum, or more properly, the Flavian Amphitheater, rises from the valley floor between the Esquiline Calian and Palatine Hills would amass and a presence that the surrounding streets amplify rather than diminish. At midnight, it is closed. The gates that admit the 50,000 spectators who fill it on game days are shut. The elaborate machinery of the hypogeum beneath the arena floor, the cages and elevators and passages that release animals and gladiators into the arena's sunlit performance space is quiet. But it is not entirely empty. The animals are still there. The Colosseum maintained its animal collection continuously, not only on game days. The lions and leopards and bears and exotic creatures from across the empire that performed in the arena's hunts lived in the Colosseum's basement facilities between performances, tended by the animal handlers who were their permanent keepers. From outside the Colosseum at midnight, if you stand close to the structure and the night is quiet, you can hear them. The sound is not roaring, not the dramatic sound of film and imagination, more a low, continuous sound, the sound of large animals in enclosed spaces, the sound of something living that is not comfortable with its circumstances, but has made an accommodation to them. The sound carries a specific quality of wildness, of something that belongs in a different landscape, that has been transported to this city and this building, and has adapted to the impossibility of its situation with the biological pragmatism of survival. The animal handlers sleep in chambers near their charges, close enough to respond to problems, close enough that the sounds of the animals are the background of their sleep. The handlers are ordinary men doing a specialized and dangerous job. They have relationships with the animals in their care that are complicated by the knowledge that those animals will eventually be killed in the arena. Whether this knowledge creates a distance from the animals, or whether the relationship develops despite it, is a question that the documentary record does not address. Walk around the base of the Colosseum. The exterior arcade, the arched facade that will still be standing 2,000 years from now, rises above you. The stone is white in the moonlight. The arches repeat around the circumference, 160 of them on each of the lower two levels, creating a rhythm that the eye follows around the curve of the building. The building is beautiful at midnight in ways that it is not during the day, when the crowds and the commerce around it and the noise of 50,000 people inside it give it a different character entirely. At midnight, empty, white in the moonlight, the Colosseum is simply a great building. What happened inside it was not simple, but the building itself at this hour contains only the sound of animals in the dark and the patience of stone. Climb the Palatine Hill. The Palatine is the oldest of Rome's inhabited hills, the hill of legend and of genuine antiquity, where the city's earliest settlements were established, and where, by the 1st century of the empire, the imperial palace complex has spread across almost the entire hilltop. The palace at the top of the Palatine is not a single building. It is a complex of buildings, gardens, libraries, audience halls, private apartments, administrative spaces, all of them linked and expanded by successive emperors who each added their contribution to what their predecessors had built. From the top of the Palatine at midnight, the city is visible in every direction. To the north, the Tiber reflects the city's light. To the west, the hills beyond the river. To the south, the roads leading out of the city toward the coast. To the east, the great mass of Rome extending toward its outer limits, the lamplight of 1 million people visible as a warm illumination of the dark landscape. This is what empire looks like from above, not the map in a class classroom, not the narrative in a history book, not the simulation on a screen. The actual visual fact of a city that rules the world, visible from the hill at its center, at midnight, its light rising into the dark sky. Somewhere in the palace complex, the emperor is either sleeping or not sleeping. If it is the era of Augustus, the empire's founder is probably working. Augustus was notorious for sleeping poorly and working at the hours when others slept. The letters and documents he produced suggest a man of extraordinary industry, whose industry was not confined to daylight hours. If it is the era of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor is perhaps writing in his journal. The Meditations, his private philosophical notebook, was written during campaigns and in the margins of governance. The record of a man trying to maintain philosophical clarity in the midst of the demands of ruling the world. If it is the era of Nero, the emperor is perhaps performing. Nero's devotion to music and theatrical performance was genuine and consuming, and he was known to perform for audiences in the palace at hours that were inconvenient for the audiences. The specific emperor is less important than the fact of the institution. Somewhere in this palace complex, at every hour of every night, the machinery of Roman governance continues to operate. The correspondence that knits together an empire stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. The intelligence reports from provincial governors. The financial accounts of an empire whose revenues and expenditures were incomprehensible in scale. All of it managed from this hill, all of it managed by human beings, with the limitations and the capabilities that human beings bring to every task they undertake. The view from the Palatine is extraordinary and humbling simultaneously. Extraordinary in its scale, humbling in the reminder that all of this, the entire visual fact of the city below, was maintained by human effort, human organization, human attention to the 10,000 details that keep a great city functioning, and that it ended. The empire that the lamplight below represents did not last forever. The lights that illuminate the city at this midnight will not illuminate it indefinitely. The buildings whose outlines are visible against the lighter sky will not all still be standing, but they are standing now. The light is burning now. Rome is alive at this hour, in this moment, with a vitality and a scale that the ancient world never exceeded. Stand on the Palatine and look at it. There is a threshold hour in Rome before dawn when the nighttime city begins its transition to the daytime city. It begins not with light, which comes later, but with sound and movement. The markets of Rome do not open at dawn. They open before dawn, in the gray pre-dawn hour when the night's darkness has begun to thin without committing to becoming day. The vendors who sell from stalls and from the ground need to be in their positions before the buying population arrives, and the buying population arrives early. The Macellum, the main food market, is stirring now. The vegetable sellers who have been arriving from the farms and gardens outside the city's walls for the past hour are arranging their goods. The produce of the Roman countryside that feeds the city comes in overnight and early morning, carried on carts and on the backs of farmers and their animals, reaching the market in the pre-dawn hours. Cabbages and turnips and onions and garlic and the herbs that Roman cooking uses with lavish confidence. The last of the summer's figs and the first of the autumn's grapes. The olives that are beginning their harvest season, some green firm, some beginning to darken toward their ripeness. The fish sellers are particularly active. Fish in a city without refrigeration must be sold quickly. The fish that arrived at the market overnight from the coast, carried in ice-packed containers when ice was available, which was not always, is moving rapidly toward its consumption window. The fish sellers know this with the professional clarity of people whose income depends on selling before spoilage begins its work. The smell of the market in the pre-dawn hour is the smell of wet vegetation and fresh fish, and the earth that still clings to root vegetables that have been pulled from the ground within the past day. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is the smell of food before it has been cooked, the raw materials of the city's daily nourishment. A woman is the first buyer at one of the vegetable stalls. She has been awake since before the 3rd hour of the night. She manages a household of 12 people, the family of a mid-ranking merchant whose social position requires a table that reflects it. She comes to the market early because the best produce is claimed early, because the sellers she has relationships with save her the best of their goods in exchange for her consistent custom, because this is one of the places in her life where the early effort produces a directly visible return. She moves through the stalls with practiced efficiency, selecting and examining and negotiating with the ease of someone who has been doing this for years and has developed a comprehensive knowledge of what good produce looks like and what a fair price for it is. The sellers who know her greet her by name. She responds with the specific warmth that professional relationships develop when they are long established and mutually beneficial. She completes her purchases and departs. The market continues to fill behind her. The day is beginning. Return to the Tiber. It is now the 3rd hour of the night, which in Roman timekeeping places us approximately 3 hours before dawn, though the exact correspondence depends on the season, since Roman hours were divided by the amount of daylight available, rather than being fixed units. The river is different from the midnight river you stood beside at the beginning of this walk. More activity now. The barges that were the only movement on the water earlier have been joined by smaller craft. The fishermen who work the river have begun their morning operations, their small boats moving quietly in the dark water. The fishermen of the Tiber worked a river that was considerably more productive of fish than the modern Tiber. Ancient and medieval Rome relied on the river as a food source in ways that later history has reduced. The eels and other fish of the Tiber were a significant part of the city's protein supply. The fishermen work quietly. The river at this hour rewards quiet. The fish that are active in the pre-dawn water are responsive to surface disturbance, and the fishermen have learned over lifetimes of practice to minimize their impact on the water around them. A single oil lamp burns in the bow of the nearest boat, providing just enough light for the fisherman to see his line and his hands without disrupting his vision of the dark water around him. He has been on the water since the 2nd hour of the night. He will stay until the sun is well established. Then he will bring his catch to the riverside market and sell what he has caught, and go home and sleep until the evening and begin again. His father fished this river. His grandfather fished this river. The knowledge of the river, its currents and its depths and its seasonal patterns and its fish populations, is knowledge inherited and added to across generations. He does not think of himself as a keeper of tradition. thinks of himself as a fisherman, going about the work that is his livelihood and his life. The river carries his boat slowly downstream. He compensates with a small adjustment of his position. The lamp burns steadily in the pre-dawn quiet. Rome's water comes from mountains many miles away. The aqueducts that carry it are engineering achievements of the first order, structures of such confident ambition that they supplied a city of 1 million people with water at a rate that modern cities would find impressive. Several aqueducts served Rome in the imperial period: the Aqua Claudia, the Aqua Marcia, the Aqua Virgo that fed the Trevi Fountain, the Annio Novus, each one a channel running from a mountain spring across the countryside, supported where necessary by the arch structures that became the most visually distinctive feature of Roman engineering. The water flows continuously. It does not stop at night. The aqueducts do not have valves that are closed at sunset and opened at sunrise. The water runs at the same rate through the night as through the day, and the fountains that are the primary distribution points for the city's water supply run continuously. This continuous flow was partly practical. Stopping and starting the flow would create pressure variations that the distribution system could not easily manage. Continuous flow was simpler engineering. It was also one of the defining features of Roman urban life. The sound of water was everywhere in Rome, at every hour. The fountains in the public squares, the smaller distribution points in the neighborhoods, the channels that carried overflow through the streets. The sound of running water was the continuous background note of the city, present at midnight as at noon. At the entry points where the aqueducts reached the city, men were stationed to monitor the flow and to respond to any problems. The maintenance of the water supply was an administrative priority of the first order. Without it, the city could not function. These men are awake now in the pre-dawn darkness, doing their work with the quiet competence of people responsible for something essential. The water flows past them. It flows down into the city. The fountains run. The city drinks. There is a part of midnight Rome that must be acknowledged directly. Much of what makes the nighttime city function is the labor of enslaved people. Rome's economy was substantially built on slavery. The estimates of the slave population vary considerably, but a figure of perhaps 30% of the city's total population, or more in some periods, represents the scale of the institution. Enslaved people worked in the households of the wealthy as domestic workers, cooks, secretaries, teachers, physicians, artisans, and in every other role that a complex household required. They worked in the commercial enterprises of merchants and craftsmen. They worked in the public infrastructure of the city. At midnight, they are working in the houses of the wealthy on the Palatine and the other hills. The household slaves who maintain the sleeping family's needs are awake and present. The doorkeeper whose existence signals the household's status. The slave whose task is to respond to the needs of any member of the family who wakes in the night. The kitchen slave beginning the preparations for the morning meal that the household will expect to find ready. In the commercial establishments, enslaved workers are doing the labor that the establishment requires at the hour it requires it. The baker's assistants in the bakeries, the water carriers filling vessels from the public fountains, the handlers of the goods that the nighttime carts carry through the city streets. This is not a comfortable observation to make while walking through a city that is, in many respects, genuinely impressive in its organization and its achievement. The comfort of the nighttime walk through ancient Rome rests on a foundation of coerced labor that the walk itself makes invisible, because the coerced laborers are doing their work in the spaces that the comfortable walk passes through. The enslaved people of Rome were not uniformly miserable. Their conditions varied enormously with the type of work they did, the nature of the household or establishment that owned them, and the particular relationships they had with the people who owned them. Some enslaved people in Rome occupied positions of considerable responsibility and even influence. Some eventually obtained their freedom through manumission. None of that changes the fundamental fact of the institution. The absence of freedom was the defining condition of their lives, regardless of the specific quality of those lives within that absence. The midnight city that we have been walking through is beautiful and complex and alive with the evidence of human achievement. It is also a city that sustains itself through the labor of people who had no choice in the matter. Both things are true simultaneously. The walk continues. There is a district in Rome that the polite literature of the period treats with a combination of horror and fascination that tells you everything you need to know about why it was one of the most vital parts of the city. The Subura is the neighborhood that occupies the valley between the Esquiline and Viminal hills. It is dense, it is poor, it is noisy, it is crowded. It is the place where the city's life happens at its most unmediated and its most intense. At midnight, the Subura is more alive than most of the city. The entertainment establishments that serve the population of a great city are concentrated here. The popinae and the copinae, the taverns and the inns. The establishments of various kinds that serve the desires the city's population develops when the day's obligations have been set aside. The streets of the Subura at midnight are lit with more light than the residential streets of the quieter districts. More lamps, more torches at doorways, more of the activity that requires light to function. The noise level is correspondingly higher. More voices, more music, more of the continuous sound of people doing things that they have decided to do at this hour. Walking through the Subura at midnight requires a slightly different quality of attention than walking through the quieter districts. The pickpockets of Rome worked at night because the nighttime streets provided the combination of enough light to operate in and enough darkness to provide cover. The Subura's nighttime streets were their preferred territory. Juvenal, the Roman satirist, warned his contemporaries about the dangers of the nighttime Subura with the specific exaggeration of a satirist who is making a real point through an unreal lens. The dangers he describes, falling objects from upper windows, street violence, robbery, were real features of the nighttime city, even if his treatment of them was theatrical. Walking carefully, aware of your surroundings, you move through the Subura. What you are moving through is the city at its most honest, not the curated public face of the forum and the temples and the official architecture. The actual life of 1 million people in all its complexity and its need and its vitality. A man is sleeping in a doorway, not because he has chosen the doorway as a comfortable place to sleep, but because it is where the night has found him. He is covered with a piece of cloth that is not quite adequate for the purpose. A group of young men are moving through the street with the energy of people who have been awake all night and are running on the specific fuel that youth and company and the hour provide. A woman leans out of an upper window to empty a vessel into the street below, which is one of the practices that Roman street life managed through a combination of practical necessity and resigned acceptance by the people who use the street as a thoroughfare. The Subura at midnight is the city being itself without the performance. Walk toward the city's edge. Rome's major roads leave the city through gates in the ancient Servian wall and in the later Aurelian wall, and they carry the city's identity with them into the landscape beyond. The Via Appia, the Queen of Roads, leaves from the south, the Via Flaminia from the north, the Via Aurelia from the west, each one a constructed thing paved with fitted stone, wide enough for 2 carts to pass each other, maintained by the empire's administrative machinery for the movement of armies and commerce and the communications that hold the empire together. At the gates of the city, traffic continues through the night. This is where the daytime prohibition on wheeled traffic does not apply, because the prohibition applied to the city's interior. The roads beyond the gates are open to wheeled traffic at all hours, and the supply chain that feeds Rome operates continuously. Carts entering the city with goods, carts leaving the city with processed materials or waste. The continuous exchange between the city and the countryside that sustains the city's existence. Travelers leaving the city at this hour, some on the roads that lead north and south and east and west into the empire. Messengers on horseback moving with the speed that their message requires. Merchants departing for the next city on their commercial circuit. Officials traveling between Rome and the provinces. The road south, the Via Appia, passes through the area of the tombs immediately outside the city walls. The tombs of Rome line the roads leading out of the city, just as they did in Pompeii. Roman burial law required interment outside the city, and the roads were the natural locations, providing visibility for the monuments that wealthy families built to memorialize their dead. At night, the tombs are simply shapes in the dark. The inscriptions that record the names and achievements and sentiments of those buried within are invisible. The monuments that announce the family's wealth and taste and religious convictions are simply darker shapes against the dark sky, but they are there, containing who they contain, recording what they record. The soldiers buried here whose campaigns covered the world, the merchants whose trading networks connected the empire, the women whose epitaphs describe qualities that their families thought most worth remembering, the children whose small monuments carried the concentrated grief of parents who survived them. The road continues past them. The Circus Maximus, the great chariot racing stadium in the valley between the Palatine and Aventine Hills, is the largest entertainment venue in Rome and indeed in the ancient world. On race days, it holds somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 spectators. The numbers are disputed in their precision, but not in their general scale. The circus at capacity was the largest gathering of human beings in any single space in the ancient world. At midnight, it is empty. The track, a long oval of packed earth and sand, is dark. The central barrier, the spina, with its obelisks and its bronze sculptures and its turning post markers, is a dark shape running down the center of the track. The tiered seating on either side, the wooden tiers above the stone lower seating, is a series of dark levels against the slightly less dark sky. Walk into the circus. Your footsteps on the track surface produce a sound that disappears immediately into the size of the space. The circus is so large that it absorbs sound rather than reflecting it. The echo that a similar footstep would produce in a smaller enclosed space does not occur here. The space simply receives the sound and holds it. Stand at the starting gates at the curved end of the track. On race day, the horses and chariots would be behind these gates. The drivers, the aurigae, who were among the most celebrated athletes of the Roman world, would be in their vehicles with the reins wrapped around their bodies in the specific manner of Roman chariot racing, the manner that required them to carry a knife to cut the reins if the chariot overturned and they were dragged, the manner that made winning possible and losing potentially fatal. The crowds that filled the tiered seating would be divided by faction, the blues and the greens, and the reds and the whites, the chariot racing factions that inspired in their supporters a passion that made modern sports fandom look restrained and measured. Roman chariot racing fans rioted. They conducted vendettas against opposing factions. They celebrated their drivers' victories with a ferocity that the authorities repeatedly attempted to manage and that the fans repeatedly declined to moderate. At midnight, in the empty circus, none of that is present, only the space. And the space is extraordinary. The length of the track, visible from the starting end to the far curve and back, is a distance that the eye can barely manage in the dark. The width of the space, the tiered seating rising on either side, creates a sense of enclosure that is simultaneously vast and intimate. The length of the track, visible from the starting end to the far curve and back, is a distance that the eye can barely manage in the dark. The width of the space, the tiered seating rising on either side, creates a sense of enclosure that is simultaneously vast and intimate. This is where Rome played, in all its noise and its passion and its dangerous enthusiasm. At midnight, in the quiet, it is possible to feel both the space and its habitual content simultaneously. The silence is full of the absence of the crowd. Walk north toward the Campus Martius. The Pantheon, the temple to all the gods, stands here in the flat district near the river. Its current form dates to the reign of Hadrian, a building so perfectly engineered that it will still be standing complete and functional 2,000 years from now. At midnight, the Pantheon's great bronze doors are closed. The portico faces a paved square, and the columns of the portico are visible in the moonlight. The dome behind the portico is not visible from directly in front. The dome reveals itself when you enter, and you cannot enter now, but stand in the square before the portico and look at the building. The Pantheon is the most nearly perfect building in the ancient world, not in the sense of being the most impressive or the most decorated or the most expensive, in the sense of being most completely what it intended to be. The engineering, the proportions, the relationship between the interior space and the oculus that opens the dome to the sky. All of it works together with a completeness that architecture has rarely achieved before or since. The oculus, the circular opening at the top of the dome, 9 meters in diameter, the only source of natural light in the interior, open to the sky above, admitting rain when it rains, which drains through the imperceptibly sloped floor. At midnight, through the closed doors, the oculus admits moonlight. If the moon is in the right position, the moonlight enters the dome as a circle of light that moves slowly across the interior as the moon moves across the sky. The coffered ceiling of the dome catches the light. The marble floor receives the moving circle. There is no one inside to see this, or perhaps there is. A priest, a guardian, someone whose job involves being present in the building at this hour, for reasons of religious obligation or practical maintenance. They see the moving circle of moonlight on the floor. They have probably seen it many times. They are still watching it. Some things do not become ordinary through repetition. The city has been walking for hours. The night has done what nights do. It has moved through its hours toward the threshold that ends it. The threshold is not dramatic. There is no moment when dark becomes light. There is a process, a gradual warming of the sky above the eastern hills, a lightening that begins as barely perceptible and becomes undeniable over the course of perhaps an hour. The birds know before anyone else. In the gardens of the wealthy houses on the Palatine and the Esquiline, in the trees along the river, in whatever green spaces the city contains, the birds begin their assessment of the new day before the light that would justify the assessment has fully arrived. One voice first, then a second. The tentative beginning of the dawn chorus that will reach its full expression as the light increases. The bakers who have been working through the night have their bread ready. The first loaves are already at the distribution points. The bread sellers who carry them through the streets are preparing to begin their rounds. The market vendors who arrived in the pre-dawn darkness have their stalls arranged. The produce is displayed. The transactions will begin with the first customers who are already moving through the early streets. The vigiles who have been patrolling through the night are completing their final rounds. The day watch who will take over is preparing. In the insulae, the first sounds of waking are beginning. A child's voice. The movement of someone rising from their bed. The scrape of a pot being placed over a fire. The carts that have been moving through the night are making their final deliveries. The streets that will be closed to wheeled traffic with the coming of full day are receiving the last of the night's commerce. The Tiber fishermen are still on the water. They will be there until the day is well established. The barges are making their final nighttime passage. The priests at the temples are completing the rituals that transition the night to the day. The eternal fires are burning. The aqueducts are flowing. The city is waking. The light comes. Not all at once. Not with the dramatic suddenness that film and imagination prefer. Gradually, steadily, with the patience of a process that has been happening every morning for longer than Rome has existed. The sky above the eastern hills becomes first less dark, then a color that is not quite blue and not quite gray, then something that carries warmth, then the first direct light, catching the tops of the higher buildings before it reaches the streets below. The columns of the temples catch the light first. The Capitoline Hill, the Palatine, the higher ground throughout the city, receives the morning before the valleys and the streets. The Tiber catches the light and becomes briefly golden, the water reflecting a sky that is committed to becoming day. The Forum Romanum, which we stood in at midnight in its empty contemplative quiet, begins to receive its first morning visitors. Not the crowds of the full day yet. The early visitors. The advocates who have business to prepare for. The magistrates who have duties to attend to. The merchants who have transactions to arrange. The The city that we have walked through in its midnight character is becoming something different without stopping being what it was. This is the essential quality of a great city. It does not change completely from one hour to the next. It shifts. It transforms. The midnight city and the noon city are the same city expressing different aspects of itself at different hours. The people who are arriving in the Forum now are the same people who, hours ago, were sleeping in the insulae we stood outside. The same people who were buying bread at the market before dawn. The same people who are lying awake in the dark of their rooms, thinking the thoughts that the night hours encourage. They are arriving in the public space of the city, carrying their private night behind them, the way all people carry their private interiors into the public spaces they inhabit. The city receives them. The day begins. Stand one more time on the Palatine Hill, where we stood at midnight and looked out at the city. The view is different now. The lamplight that defined the nighttime city has been replaced by the direct light of the morning sun. The city below is not merely visible, but brilliant. White marble and colored paint, and the movement of 1 million people beginning their day. The Forum is filling. The markets are busy. The carts that owned the night streets have been replaced by the foot traffic, and the litters and the officials and the ordinary citizens going about the ordinary business of the world's greatest city. What we walked through tonight was the other side of this, the side that the Rome of history books does not always show. Not the speeches and the battles and the emperors and the philosophical schools. The bread baking before dawn, the fisherman on the dark river, the doorkeeper dozing at his post, the senator composing a letter by lamplight, the vigiles walking their patrol, the enslaved people doing their work in the spaces that their owners' sleep left vacant, the actual texture of 1 million human lives happening simultaneously in the hours when the city's public face was turned off, and what remained was the city being simply itself. Ancient Rome is one of the most studied civilizations in human history. We know an enormous amount about it. We have its literature, its law, its philosophy, its engineering, its art. We have the physical remains of its buildings and its streets and its objects. What we have less of is the midnight version, the informal, private, unremarkable, unrecorded version that was a majority of what actually happened in this city every day and every night for centuries. Tonight was an attempt to find that, to walk through the version of Rome that existed when no one was writing about it, when the people who lived in it were simply living in it, sleeping and working and eating and arguing and loving and worrying about tomorrow in the way that human beings do in every city in every period. They were not performing for history. They were just living their lives. The city was real. It is gone now, in the sense that the living city is gone. The Rome of 1 million people, the aqueducts flowing, the eternal fires burning, the circus full and roaring, but the stones are still there. The roads are still there. The hills are still there. The Tiber is still there. And the midnight walk through ancient Rome is still possible. In the imagination that takes the stones and the roads and the hills and the river and populates them with what we know of the people who lived among them, which is what tonight was. A walk through what was, taken with as much attention and as much care as we could give it. The city deserved that much. If tonight's journey gave you something worth carrying into the quiet before sleep, there is a subscribe button below that I would genuinely appreciate you using. And tell me in the comments, which corner of ancient Rome would you most want to have seen at midnight? The Forum, the Colosseum, the Subura, the palace on the Palatine? Because Rome at midnight is a city large enough that we have only walked a portion of it tonight. The rest is still out there, in the dark, waiting. The lamps are burning in the windows. The carts are on the streets. The water is running in the fountains. The carts are on the streets. The water is running in the fountains. Rome is awake. It never truly slept.